There's just this sense of oneness. It's spiritual, really, but it's also, I think people have that feeling when they're really doing something that's in, quote, their place.
Debbie, there's that phrase, think out of the box. You were that kid who never got in the box. No one was going to clip your wings. You had a sense of adventure. Where did that come from the get-go?
I think my dad encouraged it, but I think I was born that way.
Just that sense of adventure and just trying everything, but also having parents that encouraged you to try things.
Exactly. My parents were very hands-off. We just were allowed to roam, so they didn't really know what I was doing usually, but I really didn't like anybody telling me what to do.
A lot of us remember the very first plane trip that we ever took, and I remember I went to Taiwan at 3 months old, didn't remember that, but we were coming back to the States, and I thought it was a magic trick. How is this thing up in the air and staying up in the air? Thank you. Do you remember your very first plane ride?
I do. It was on an airliner. When we decided we were going to move to Trinidad, we flew from Florida up to New Jersey to see my grandparents. And the pilots let me come up and sit in their seats and all that. And I didn't have quite that same sense of wonder. I had more of that sense of wonder just lying on my back and looking up into the sky. That's what really amazed me. The first time I went up in a little plane, that was really significant. It was like, oh, I steer with my feet on the ground.
And there's a difference between that big plane and the little plane.
Yes, an enormous difference. You're encased in the big plane, you're riding along, but when you take your first flying lesson, it's like, wow.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you right there. Took your first flying lesson, but you were a girl. Girls didn't do that type of thing. Want to bet, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Luckily, my dad never said that, and my mother didn't either. As soon as I got to the island of St. Thomas, I found a job, I found us a house, and I found a flying club. It was so cheap, it was $10 an hour.
It's just a matter of time when you've gotten your feet wet and you're good at what you do that you search for other opportunities. And when it comes to flying, the aerobatics career, that's like as thrilling as I would imagine it gets.
That was as good as it gets. To me, that was the ultimate. For some people, the ultimate would be flying an airliner. But I was much more, let's have fun. I started out in gliders, which is the fun side, and then I met a man doing an air show and talked to him a long time, and he remembered me later and looked me up and offered me the chance to do formation aerobatics. And I didn't know how to do it, but he taught me, and I was willing to learn.
And did it well. You actually formed an all-woman wing walking act at the age of 54. Nothing stopping you.
Yeah, that was only brief. Anytime any opportunity came up that I had never done, I always said yes.
That earned you a spot in the International Council of Airshows Hall of Fame in 2012. People have called you the world's greatest woman stunt flyer. What was it like being in the so-called man's world? There are some women who say they had to negotiate their way around it. Others say, didn't notice, I was too busy doing my thing.
Yeah, I was more in the second category. I loved it, actually. I totally loved it. There would be men who were enthusiastic and wanted to help you. There would be men that would be kind of offended. And if a man gave me a bad time, I generally would try to turn it into a joke rather than, taking offense.
Yeah, and then get back up in the air as you did. Take us back into the cockpit, because when you're there, obviously there are things you need to get done to set the path that you're in. But when you're up there, what kind of joy, what kind of peace does that give you? Explain that to us.
The first time I actually experienced that feeling that you're describing was in a glider. And it was maybe the 7th time that I'd been up by myself. But as I was flying along, I just had this peaceful feeling of like a big hand holding me up. And I get that feeling often in an airplane, and even flying air shows. I would be rolling in, and it's spiritual, really, but it's also when you really are being your authentic self.
And at the same time that it brings you that kind of joy and peace, there was a situation that was tragic for you. Your former fiance died in an air show.
Right.
And for a lot of people, they would think that would give you pause to ever go back up in the air again or to stop. But your view on life is do what you love while you're still around to do it.
Early on, you start losing friends. I mean, the first time that you lose a friend, you're really haunted by it. But in a business like the air show business, you end up knowing a lot of people who get killed. I mean, it's like race car driving and any kind of dangerous sport. But I was certainly shocked, needless to say, when he was killed. But
It didn't stop you.
It didn't stop me, but it took something away from me for a year. I think people who've lost a partner, they're kind of in shock for a year, and I was. I kept flying, but I lost my joy. I did get it back. I totally got it back, but you feel really lost. But I know it's dangerous. You have to face death. If you do something dangerous, you have to literally come to terms with it, or you're paralyzed.
Yeah, and you miss out on exploring and experiencing a full life. You have basically traveled around the world 3 times. You haven't stayed put any place until you got to Houston.
That's the truth.
You had a stretch here.
Go
you
Houston.
love flying.
I love Houston. I mean, I have lived in a lot of, the Caribbean, Canada, California, and so on, but there's something about Houston I love so much. I had a chance to move away. I moved away briefly, and I was like, I really miss Houston. I love the people here.
And you're right down the street and around the corner from NASA, so the ultimate
Yes.
flight, right? But
Yes.
where else? I thought I knew almost everything about Houston. Like in most people's garages, they can have like golf carts along with their cars and things like that. In your garage, you've got your car, but then you just got a plane because you live in a special neighborhood. It's pretty cool.
Yes, this is called an air park, and that means that it's surrounded by houses. It's a private airstrip. You're only supposed to land here if you either live here or have a friend here, something like that. When I moved here, I didn't know anybody, but next thing you know, you've got at least 4 best friends.
Yeah, and
who
rush
love
hour traffic means nothing to you in Houston, does it?
Exactly. I get up and look at it from the air. Well, I don't want to get on 45 now. It's really busy.
You still fly, but you have also gotten the opportunity to come back to something that you started out with much earlier in life, and that's the journalism piece to you.
Yes.
And the writing. As you mentioned earlier, you went back to college in your 40s, got your journalism degree from the University of Houston. You wrote for the Smithsonian's Air and Space magazine, the things that you know. What does writing do for you? As you mentioned, the piece of being in the sky, but the piece of putting pen to paper.
It's exactly the same thing. When you're writing a piece and you're not thinking, you're just in the flow, you have that same really divine feeling.
What do you have to say to people who wish they could but never do?
Go do it. Definitely go do it. You will fail. You'll fail many, many times. When you were a little kid, that didn't bother you. You fell down, you got up, you fell down, you got up. Get over the idea of perfection. It may never happen. It's certainly not going to happen right away. Go out and make mistakes, but do whatever you're thinking about that's in your heart.
You've done almost everything you could do with a plane over your life. Living close to the NASA area, in fact, you have a lot of folks who work at NASA in your neighborhood. Have you ever thought, maybe I would love to go into space?
I asked myself that question back in 1969. I went back to college, and it was the time of the first lunar landing. It was right before that. And I thought about it really seriously, because people kept asking me that. And I realized, no, I'm too rebellious.
You're
Too rebellious.
What would you be doing up there in space that was rebellious?
Yeah, I can follow the rules for about that long. That's pretty ADHD. But
Debbie, close the door right now. Close the door.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for being such a great role model to so many members of our community, and thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Oh, thank you. What a joy. I really appreciate it.
The plane has now landed. The captain says that you can now unfasten your seatbelt.